well-being. I'm Kimberly Kirkland with UAB Arts and Medicine, and it's our mission to enhance healing and wellness for patients, families, and staff, and the communities that we work with and serve. And so again, as I mentioned before, if you'd like to put in the chat where you're from or your connection with our topic tonight, please do so. Also, if you have any anything that you want to know or anything specific that you'd like to glean from this conversation tonight, you can also put that in the chat. Yeah, we hope to engage in some meaningful discussion as well. So please feel free to put any questions you may have in the chat, and we'll get to those throughout the next hour. Also, please note this is being recorded. So if you would not like your image recorded, you may turn off your camera. And now we'll start our event. So tonight is our May Virtual Mental Health Monday, and May is Maternal Mental Health Awareness Month. And tonight we have two incredible women who are actively working to expand access to critical mental health services for women who are thinking about pregnancy, they are currently pregnant or postpartum. Angelina Spicer is an LA-based comedian. She's hilarious. She's a mother, a documentarian, and self-described accidental activist. And Dr. Eynav E, who I've known for many, many years, is a brilliant clinical psychologist, researcher, and director of the new Reproductive Psychology Program at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles. And I'm so excited that they are both here with us this evening, and I am going to turn it over to them.
What's up? I'm Angelina Spicer. Anywhere there's a comedy club, comedy show, Angelina Spicer has been through there.
Be honest, this is Baby Make Me Look Pregnant.
How the hell did this shit happen? Oh, baby. I'm a new mom. They put my daughter on me for skin to skin, and I was like, what is the return policy? She's fed, she's changed, and she's still screaming. Here you go. I knew something was wrong when I felt so overwhelmed that I would eat dinner in my car.
I am trying to figure out how to juggle everything.
My postpartum depression and anxiety was almost immediate. It just ballooned.
And at first I was in denial. I was like, dang, that's a fucking white girl's disease. Like, I don't know.
We check mothers for preeclampsia, gestational diabetes, but postpartum depression and anxiety is more common than any of those other ones. 1 in 4 women experience postpartum depression. PPD, how can I explain it? It's what the doctors name it. When you're crying, laugh the same time with it. P is for post, other for partum after baby. The last D, well, that's not that easy. Bust it. You're sort of like you're happy and you're sad. It's a contradiction. Work, postpartum depression, and postpartum anxiety led me to a psychiatric hospital.
But like when it hit me, I was looking out the window and I was like, God, I wonder how far I can make it with 2 broken legs.
For a very long time, that was off limits. People want to sell you this fake fantasy on Facebook about how wonderful, oh my God, my heart is beating outside of my body. And because we don't talk about this as women, as mothers, how hard it is and how it doesn't let up, you think you're the only one. Too real? Like, show me that struggle on Snapchat. That's the real shit. That's what comedy is, you know? You live, you experience things, you have tragedies, you find new things to laugh about. That's my time. Y'all have been great. I'm Angelina Spicer.
So thank you all so much for being here. I'm Dr. Eynav E. Thank you for the kind introduction, Kimberly, and thank you for joining me here, Angelina. It's always a pleasure. to present with you. And I think Amanda's getting my slides ready. So thank you so much for getting those going. And I'm really so proud and thrilled to be here. I wish it were in person. I wish I had this excuse to come home. I was raised in Birmingham, and as Kimberly said, we've known each other for a long time, since we were 12. And I've been a UAB brat since I can remember. My parents were both faculty at UAB until very recently. And so I grew up on that campus. And so it's just real nice to be able to come full circle. And it's also just kind of funny. I was contemplating it the other day, just sort of my story, my path. And I was interested in science and research from a young age. So I started, and Kimberly might remember this, at 16 years old, when everyone was going to the lake in the summer, I was going to the lab and doing research. And Max Cooper's immunology lab, and after that, Harold Sontheimer's neurobiology lab, and after that, Ed Cook's psychophysiology lab. So I was kind of moving out of the body into the brain and becoming more and more interested in psychology. But I've always been interested in, biological risk factors and things like that. And actually, a paper of mine is being presented at a psychoneuroimmunology conference, which I didn't even know was a field when I was doing working in all these 3 different fields. So again, thank you so much for having me. If we go to the next slide, I want to just start talking to y'all a little bit about, what we've all collectively been going through. And so, none of these headlines are going to be shocking to you all. This isn't really news to any of us anymore. We are absolutely in a mental health crisis. This is affecting everybody. Those individuals who were at risk or already had diagnoses of a mental illness are struggling even more now. And particularly for parents, especially parents of young children, the pandemic has been really traumatic, honestly, especially for working, parents that work outside the home and inside the home, because everybody's been at home. What hasn't changed, though, and I'll just pause on this last headline in the LA Times, because you're seeing this as CNN, New York Times, Washington Post. I mean, it doesn't matter where in the country you live, but locally close to home, a young mother killed all 3 of her children, one a newborn, in a bout of postpartum psychosis. And I'm going to talk to you all a bit today about this sort of range of different disorders that can happen when you're pregnant or postpartum. And certainly postpartum psychosis is the most severe. It's truly an emergency. And unfortunately, this young woman, Ms. Carrillo, as well as others, just really fall through the cracks of our system. And it's absolutely unacceptable. So let's talk a little bit about the sort of roller coaster ride that is motherhood, that is parenthood, which, as Angelina said in her documentary trailer, and as she'll talk about from her own perspective soon, starts before, usually even before you get pregnant. In fact, infertility is increasingly common, and the prevalence of psychological distress in a woman and even within her family is very high. If you have multiple rounds of IVF, IUIs, typically that comes with a lot of pregnancy loss, a lot of grief. And it's very much regardless of the type of loss or the timing of the loss, but this causes psychological distress that unfortunately we really don't talk about as much in our society as I think Angelina would agree. Really, we wish it would be, because 1 out of 4 women are experiencing some sort of pregnancy loss, regardless of timing or type, and are experiencing grief. So it's not surprising, right, that women have psychological distress after having multiple perinatal losses. But what might surprise you is that even after having a healthy baby, right, years later, women are still suffering. So this isn't something that you get over. You don't just get over this, right? And this sets the scene. So if we go to the next slide, you can see The term that we're really using more and more and more in our field is perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. So what we've learned in the past couple of decades is that depression is very common, but anxiety is actually more common than depression in the pregnancy and after. So what you probably heard about and what I learned about in graduate school was postpartum depression. That's all anyone ever talks about, postpartum depression. But what we're talking about now and in the past 10, 20 years are this range of mental health disorders. It absolutely includes depression and several different types of anxiety, but one that's often not talked about, obsessive compulsive disorder. I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about that. Panic disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder. And it occurs, what perinatal means is it means anytime during the pregnancy or up to 1 year postpartum. Now, pre-pandemic prevalence rates of perinatal mood and anxiety disorders was 1 out of 5, 20% of women. These are diagnoses, okay? So sometimes people get a little confused. Well, I've heard 1 out of 10. Well, I've heard 1 out of 4. Well, I've heard, okay. Keep in mind that depending on the research that you're reading or who is sharing those numbers with you, it may just be screening, right? So they're screening at risk for certain symptoms. But what I'm talking about here are diagnostics. So 1 out of 5 mothers have clinically relevant diagnoses of a PMAD. And those who have babies in the NICU or themselves have a maternal complication like preeclampsia, that increases their risk to 30%. And women of color have an even higher risk of 40%. Now, I would love to share with you the we're not post-pandemic, but during pandemic prevalence rates, but that research hasn't really come out. But what we do know is that symptoms are much, much higher. So there's been some research looking at symptoms of depression and anxiety during pregnancy and postpartum, and I've seen as high as 70%. Okay, so it's definitely much, much worse. PMADs are the most common complication of pregnancy and postpartum. And if they're left untreated, it's not just affecting the mother, it's devastating for her entire family and really for society as a whole, because these are the same women who may not be returning to work, for example. So let's talk a little bit about the differences between baby blues, postpartum depression, and postpartum psychosis. And I'm going to leave aside the prenatal because it's important that you understand oftentimes the symptoms begin in pregnancy. So screening during pregnancy for depression and anxiety is critical because it's going to affect, are women coming in to see their doctors? Are they taking medications they need to take? Are they doing the tests they need to do? Are they taking care of themselves, right? Not smoking, not drinking. And it places you at higher risk for postpartum problems if you have prenatal symptoms. I wish this was talked about in every childbirth ed class. We do talk about this at ours at Cedars. I joined the team at Cedars-Sinai about 7 years ago. And that's one of the first changes that I made. And I have felt very supported at Cedars. My whole passion and focus is really on prevention. I think there's so much that we could be doing to prepare women, prepare birthing people, prepare their partners, prepare their family for the realities of motherhood and not the social media, glorification or media bullshit, if you'll excuse my French. I don't know if I'm allowed to curse on this, but I will stop now. But the reality is that we have positive and negative feelings, and that's normal. It is normal to have a day or a moment of joy, and at that same day have zero interest in your baby, right? It is absolutely normal if you feel overwhelmed by a sense of responsibility. And some women may have instant love for their baby, but that's actually, it's the minority. Most women do not feel a sense of connection when they're pregnant or with a newborn. It usually takes several months, okay? So I wish we talked about this more openly, because when women have these negative feelings, they think something's wrong with me. Am I a terrible mother, right? Because no one ever talks about the negative feelings. Next slide. The other issue that I think is very critically important for any MDs or nurses nurse midwives, doulas, anyone that's more on the medical side of things, if you're joining us here. Of course, that it's depression and anxiety can be confused with what we call sort of normal changes in the body, right, during pregnancy and postpartum. So it can be difficult as a medical provider to tease that apart and to understand that being really tired, fatigued, having sleep problems, having stomach aches, nausea, difficulty breathing, all these symptoms can be normal signs and symptoms of a healthy pregnancy or a healthy postpartum recovery period. So it can be hard to know. Providers could ask the question in a very certain way to tease this apart. And one example, I'm just going to give you one example. Asking a woman who is 9 months pregnant, are you having trouble sleeping, is a joke, right? Of course she is. She is big, she's uncomfortable, she can't get, to sleep. Asking a woman with a newborn, waking her up to eat every 2 hours, if she's got sleep issues, is also similarly a joke, right? But if you asked a new mother, imagine a hypothetical situation. Your baby is out with your partner or your mother, someone you trust entirely. Every single thing on your to-do list is checked off. The house is clean. The cleaning crew came through. The bedroom is dark. The sheets are clean and you're exhausted. Can you get in that bed and sleep? And women with postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety, postpartum OCD, all these are going to say no. I cannot. I'm tossing, I'm turning, I'm crying, I'm nervous, I'm anxious, I'm upset. So just asking the question in a very particular way, and it takes a little bit of training, but how easy is that? Now you know. Now you're going to ask the question that way, right? Next slide. So one of my pet peeves with my physician colleagues and nurse midwife colleagues and others is, and thankfully this happens less and less and less. 6-week postpartum checkup. Mom comes in to see the doctor. She complains about these symptoms that you see here, mood swings, irritability, crying. Doctor says, nurse says, this is normal. It's just baby blues. You're going to be fine. Well, that's the only checkup she gets, y'all. That's it. She doesn't get another one. She goes home. Baby blues is over after 2 weeks post-delivery. At 6 weeks, this is not baby blues. It will not go away on its own. It's likely to turn into chronic depression, and she has now been sent home from her provider. That's a really big problem. So it's also about education, right? It is true. 50 to 80% of women are going to have hormonal changes that cause mood swings and irritability, crying at the diaper commercials, of course. And the presentation of baby blues is different depending on the culture, but it always starts around delivery and it always ends around 2 weeks postpartum. The feelings can last for a few days. They can last that whole 2-week period, but they are going to go away. They're going to go away on their own. If, next slide, you have a lot of these symptoms and you're more than 2 weeks post-delivery, this is not baby blues. This is postpartum depression or postpartum anxiety, and an intervention is needed. So about 10% of women pre-pandemic were 10%. So again, this is diagnostic, not symptoms. Okay, they didn't just screen you for depression symptoms postpartum. They did that. They saw you were at risk, and then they did a diagnostic interview. So now you're diagnosed with postpartum depression. It's about 1 out of 10. I did see some recent data looking at closer to 30% during the pandemic. So postpartum depression has gone up. These are a lot of the symptoms that you will see. And I just want to point out one that's very important, which is this overwhelming anxiety, which is why I bolded it and underlined it. We didn't know for a very long time that anxiety was so common during pregnancy and postpartum. We didn't realize that 70%, a recent research study found that 7 out of 10 new mothers have negative, scary, intrusive thoughts. That is part of your postpartum depression or your postpartum anxiety. That isn't you being psychotic. That isn't you going to act on it. That isn't you. You would never, and we'll get to postpartum psychosis in a moment, but this kind of anxiety where the fear is, I'm going to drop my baby when I walk down the stairs, or my baby's so slippery in the bathtub. What if I just let go and baby drowns? That is an anxiety disorder. And most women who have these symptoms, I would say all 99.9%, are going to do absolutely everything in their power to ensure that they don't hurt their baby. So there's a mix up there that gets confused for postpartum psychosis. And so we do need to have our physicians, particularly our ER physicians, aware that there is a big difference between postpartum OCD or postpartum anxiety and postpartum psychosis. So let's go ahead and look at the next slide and talk about postpartum psychosis. This is very rare, okay? It only occurs in about 1 in 1,000 births. These are thoughts of harming the baby that are not considered foreign. They hear voices, they see visions. Oftentimes these can be religious in nature. So I've talked to women who've experienced postpartum psychosis, and they will explain that God told them they don't deserve to have children, so they need to kill themselves. This is a delusion. They can act paranoid, notably frightened, profoundly agitated, and a lack of sleep that's beyond what any other postpartum mom experiences. This is a true emergency, okay? These are the women like Miss Carrillo, who I mentioned, a recent, unfortunately, story that happened here in LA, where they then act out on these visions and on these voices that are telling them to hurt themselves or telling them to hurt their children, okay? A couple things that I think are important to note about this, and we do a lot of training with our nursing staff and our ER staff to understand, is if a woman tells you she's having thoughts that her baby will slip out of her hands, right, and fall, and she's doing everything, she's only wearing her baby, she won't hold the baby, she'll just wrap, you know, if she is telling you all these things she's doing to keep her baby safe, believe her. That's not psychosis, okay? Go to the next slide and let me share one other thing, a way that you can kind of see the differences here. So postpartum blues, very, very common, does increase your risk for postpartum depression and postpartum anxiety, but it is not pathological. It's going to go away on its own. You do want to keep it in mind. That's why we screen in the hospital. We understand we could be picking up baby blues. We get that. But we also know that much like the 6-week visit, the hospital visit is when we got you. That's when we have your attention. That's when we have your spouse's attention. That's when we can do the screening. That's when we can provide the education. And again, it's 6 weeks. So even though postpartum baby blues goes away, we see this as an opportunity. Postpartum depression, less common, about 10% or so are diagnosed. The majority have their onset by around 6 weeks postpartum, but I want to mention, and Angelina is going to speak more about this when she talks about her personal experience. Yeah, she didn't feel good for a real long time, and she'll share her story. But when it really hit rock bottom, and when she and her therapist knew she needed to get severe, like we need treatment and we need an intervention and it needs to be now, was months and months and months postpartum. So 1/3 of women could get this diagnosis even up to a year postpartum. And stopping breastfeeding is one of those windows. So the hormonal changes that come from weaning your baby, you could have had a very, very good, stable mental postpartum, you know, stable mentally and emotionally, and then you wean. And that could happen 8 months, 10 months, 1 year postpartum, and that's when we see symptoms. And the last thing I'll mention about this slide, I just want to be very mindful of time. What I mean here by 70% are affective disorders. So we can look in the chart of our patients and we can see this woman has a bipolar disorder diagnosis. This woman has a major depressive disorder diagnosis. This woman has a schizoaffective disorder diagnosis. She came to this pregnancy and this delivery with an affective disorder. We now need to be mindful. We now need to do a better job taking care of her mental health because she is at higher risk for postpartum psychosis. And that's another piece of information I think is really critical. Next slide. Okay, this is what I want to spend the remaining few minutes of my time on because, like I said, I'm very passionate about prevention. And women and families have so many strengths and can be very resilient. And there's a lot that we can do to prevent postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety, and other problems. And these are some of the things we can do. When I talk, though, about self-care, which I'll use this acronym REST, okay? These are not interventions for postpartum depression and postpartum anxiety. This is preventative. Once you have postpartum depression or postpartum anxiety, then you need to be considering, regular therapy. You need to be considering medication. And in some cases, you may need to be considering inpatient care. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about prevention, because we get this question a lot. I'm going to be pregnant. This is my first pregnancy. I've had depressive disorder. I want to know what I can do. These are some of the things you can do. So make relaxation a priority. Find 10 minutes of your day to do either active or passive relaxation. And you can find the 10 minutes, even with a postpartum baby. You can put the baby in a stroller or wrap and go out for a leisurely 10-minute walk in nature. Just being in nature, you would be surprised how incredibly healing that can be. That isn't the same thing as the E for energy. When I think about energy, that's once your doctor's given you the okay, right? Whether it's in pregnancy or postpartum, meaning you physically recovered, you can move your body again. I don't like the E for exercise. Exercise makes me think of my 20s when I'd go to the gym and I'd lift weights for an hour and I'd do classes and it was amazing. Okay, no, this is 30 minutes, yoga, a brisk walk, jogging, and being really aware of what you're eating. There's so much that we could do with our diet. That is not an intervention. It's to prevent problems, lower inflammation, right? Make sure you're getting those nutrients like vitamin D, magnesium, selenium. These are things that are depleted in your body postpartum. I can't say enough about sleep. Angelina's going to talk a little bit about that and how horrendous that can be in the postpartum period. And I like to talk to moms about how sleep is not a luxury in your pregnancy and postpartum. It's an absolute necessity. And you need to have people in place so that you can get chunks of sleep. And even if you're breastfeeding, you can still be getting chunks of sleep to make sure to protect your sleep. And then there's sleep hygiene, which is also a really helpful intervention to help you get your sleep back on track. And that can be done within the context of psychotherapy. But when I talk about the T in this acronym for REST, I also just mean talking. Talk to your spouse, talk to your best friend, talk to your mother, right? There is help out there. There's groups. I know someone already put in a Facebook group in the chat. Thank you for that. I saw that pop up. I think it's really critically important to get us moms talking to each other. And the last slide, or next to last slide, I think. So the Reproductive Psychology Program started back in 2019 with just me. And I was seeing individual patients for cognitive behavioral therapy in my clinic. In 2020, we had a wonderful licensed clinical social worker join us, who's our patient navigator and runs one of our groups. And since then, we've had a reproductive psychiatrist join part-time. We've had another social worker. So the idea is, let's have warm handoffs. So when women screen high on the inpatient side, or they screen high at their 6-week postpartum checkup at Cedars-Sinai, they can come straight to us. And they don't have to come to a building with the psychiatry or behavioral health, which can be very daunting, right? We are within the OB-GYN clinic, and I'm literally next door to your OB or your maternal fetal medicine physician, because health is health. Physical health is health. Mental health is health. It's all health. Next slide. What Angelina and I have been very passionate about is getting that information out there, that mental health is just as important as physical health, and that maternal mental health is critically important and overlooked. I don't want to go into all these details with the different bills that we have been advocating for. I'll just mention that I had met Angelina one other time before this, but that was summer of 2018. And I think it was that flight that we actually became friends. So I have a really great memory of that trip up to Sacramento when Angelina and I went and testified for the AB 2193 bill. Again, as a Cedars-Sinai clinical psychologist, I have been training our nursing staff to do screening since 2017. So I didn't need a law to tell me to do what's right. Okay. But many hospitals don't have one champion. They just have a ton of need of various issues, lactation support, this, that, the other, and they're all important. Sometimes you need a kick in the pants, right? To be able to train your staff and do what's right. So thankfully, these two bills are now effective. And then the last slide to sort of hand the mic over to Angelina is that we didn't stop in the summer of 2018. If you could be there to talk about maternal mental health in Los Angeles and beyond, I think one of these pictures is, yeah, Mommy Con was in Portland, Oregon in 2019. We've been there. We are trying to get the word out. So the last thing I'm going to say, and then I'm going to let Angelina take over, is just to stay in touch with us. We love to talk to your group, to come out, to share experience and to spread the word. So be in touch with us on social media, and let Angelina take it from here. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Accortt. Thank you everyone for being here. I'm so happy that we switched back to the gallery view because I'm a stand-up comedian. So I like to see faces. I like to see energy. I like to hear laughs and see teeth smiling. Yes, thank you so much, Kelly, for turning on your camera. Yes, and waving at me. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Dr. Accortt, thank you so much. UAB, thank you so much for showing everyone, showing the world that there is power in advocacy with the arts. It's amazing. I never imagined that. Put up a post today on Instagram. I never thought that, 6 years ago when I was experiencing severe postpartum depression, that I would be used in this way to you all. It just blew my mind. I entertain people at comedy clubs. I'm usually acting a fool. And now I'm some kind of activist. It's weird or whatever. Okay. Good to see you all. I am a stand-up comic. I've been married. My husband is not a stand-up comedian. He is actually a criminal defense attorney. He's the serious person in the family. He has clients on death row, and he's working his tail off to get folks new trials and to get their convictions overturned. But again, I'm the comic. My husband and I have been married for almost 13 years now. Don't do the math. Yes, we're old, but we don't look old. But my husband and I, we decided, is my husband depressed? John asked. My husband is not depressed. And, his emotions matter, but mine matter more right now. Thank you for asking about him. Mine matter more. That's right. Mm-hmm. So yes, my husband and I have been married for a while. We decided to get pregnant. I was on track for, my goal was to be on Saturday Night Live, and I was working my tail off to get there. It didn't happen for me. And I decided, you know what? I've been married for a while. I know my man. Let's have a baby. We had a baby. We got pregnant. And it happened. It happened rather quickly. So quickly that I was like, oh my God, okay, uterus, we're responding. We're reacting. We're here. I got pregnant right away. And my pregnancy was fine. I felt good. I felt I was energetic. I didn't really have morning sickness. I know a lot of people, that's the first thing they ask was was it a really rough pregnancy? My pregnancy was fine, honestly, up until around 30 weeks pregnant. I don't, use the weeks term, 30 weeks, 38 weeks. And when I'm in dusty comedy clubs, because people are like 38 weeks, when is that? Is that 6 months? Yes. Okay. So around 30 weeks, that's when things kind of took a turn. And I was notified at one of my sonogram appointments that my daughter was, quote, measuring small. And I didn't really understand what that was or really what to do about it. And the doctor told me, he's like, well, it's pretty serious and your baby could die in utero. I was like, huh? He's like, yeah, if she doesn't grow significantly, we have to really monitor her weight and, the measurement of her bones and head and all these things. If she doesn't grow according to this scale or these scales, she might die. And so my OB-GYN was like, okay, you've got to eat more calories and stop working out. And then immediately I started processing it like, there's something that I can do to prevent this from getting worse, right? So I was like eating all the calories. I was like, stop working out and whatever. But during that whole time, it was an 8-week period where I'd have to go in twice a week for monitoring and like stuff my face, eat cookies for breakfast and sweet tea from McDonald's, all kind of things that I would never, ever, ever do to try to get my baby to get fat. I'm like, come on, baby, gain weight, right? And at that point, that's when my anxiety really started ramping up. But I didn't know that like, okay, I'm anxious, or like every time I go in for the monitoring, the NSTs exams, that like my anxiety is ramping up. I don't know that. I don't know that every time I'm like stuffing my face with Chips Ahoy and Lorna Doones at the hospital that I'm like full of anxiety. I don't know, because no one ever really told me what it was, So I managed to stay pregnant for another 8 weeks. And all my mamas out there, we know that like when there are complications or you're marked high risk, you're like, baby, stay in, don't get out. You're like doing whatever you can to keep that baby in, locked in, warm, and feeling good, no matter how uncomfortable it is for us, right? So I managed to keep the baby in to 38.5, and I'm like, woo, I'm a champion. Yes, I did it. Then I pushed the baby out, and I felt like old Angelina died. I was like, whoa. First of all, this labor was ridiculously intense, and I didn't almost die. I know a lot of people who have had severe complications. I had a somewhat normal labor, but I felt like I had gone through like World War 17. I felt like I had gotten jumped in a gang fight, like beat up. I felt wrecked. And I just remembered this cloud of despair hanging over me, like, wait a minute, I have to mom now? I have to, after all of that, I have to now take this baby home and do what? It was just mind-boggling to me. And that was the moment, the first moment, and we'll see it in the documentary that I'm creating, but we'll see in that moment, I looked like I had seen the devil, like looked the devil in his eyeballs. I was like, whoa, this is crazy. So anyway, we get the baby home. Again, my husband is a willing participant in this whole thing. Okay. He's not some bystander. He's not, the schlubby husband that some women complain about. He is like eager. He's up with me every 2 hours. We're tag teaming. Like we're in it together. Yes. Applause for my man. Yes. Tech support, Amanda. Yes. Tag team. Yes. My man. He was there for me. But it was like, my mama's out there, and some of you guys, some of the gentlemen, Kit Cox and Mr. John, I'm sure like when you're feeling down or feeling off, that you feel like it's an itch that you can't quite get to. It's like something's wrong, but you're trying to muscle through. That's how I felt. I felt like I wanted help, but I didn't know what to ask for. And whatever help was given, it wasn't enough. It wasn't the right kind of help. I just felt like a clusterfuck. Sorry for cussing. Eynav did it. I'm going to do it. It felt like a clusterfuck. I wanted to ask for help, but I didn't know what I needed. I didn't know how to say, babe, can you, stay up with the baby for 6 hours? I remember we would tag team and we would give each other breaks. Dr. Accortt spoke about, rest, and we tried. My husband would take the baby on walks so that I could have some alone time. I would go to the grocery store. That's my respite because I'm a nerd. And I would go to the grocery store and walk around. But the thing is that I was so in a ditch that nothing helped. Like, I would spend time away from the baby and would regret, or like, I wouldn't want to go home. I'd be like, once I go home, she's going to need something. I'm going to have to be on as soon as I get in the house. So I had intrusive thoughts, the thoughts of, falling down the stairs with my baby. I mean, to the point where, like, I told my husband, you got to go to Home Depot and get some sandpaper for these stairs. Because if I fall down this, in my mind, I was like, watch, I'm going to wake up at 3 a.m. I'm going to be going downstairs to get some water. Because when you're breastfeeding, you feel like you're walking through the Sahara. And I would go downstairs and I would try to get some water, and the baby's going to go flying and I'm going to go flying. And it was a mess. Anyhow, thankfully, I was in therapy during this whole time. And I always tell my mamas, get a therapist. Your husband doesn't work. Your best friend doesn't work. A professional. You need a professional. And thankfully, thank God, my therapist was with me through the whole time. And I would bring my daughter to therapy. My therapist would hold my daughter so that I could have a moment to myself. I could have an hour to myself. And luckily, she and I had a relationship before I got pregnant and before I was having complications, because the relationship was strong enough for her to see the decline in my mental health. So at 8 months postpartum, I went to therapy one day, and my therapist looked at me and said, you shouldn't go home. You should, I'm going to do something for you. And I hope that this is okay, but I'm going to recommend that you check into a psychiatric facility for treatment. And I felt so relieved, y'all. I felt like, finally, the burden is off of me to have to fix this and to have to articulate what's wrong or how to climb out of it. Like, thank you. So I went willingly. I was like, this is going to be my vacation. I'm checking in. And I just might not come home. I thought about not coming home many times. But after getting treatment at the psych facility, I felt like I had the timeout that I needed to really recalibrate my mind, adjust my expectations of myself, of my husband, of motherhood. Like I needed that time to say, okay, that was a shift. How do we now gather and come back? And when I was released from the psych ward, I remember feeling super scared about succeeding, because I felt like I had failed before. But I just felt like, wow, I had been given a tremendous gift that women like Carrillo, who Dr. Accortt spoke about in the news, she didn't get. She didn't have. No one gave her an opportunity to recalibrate and come back. So I have really been on a mission to just open the floodgates with my story, with humor and some levity and some like, girl, you're not crazy. They just lied. It's all a lie. Don't believe the lie. Right? It's like we all have expectations of ourselves. We all want to succeed. Many times we wanted this. We wanted the joy of having a baby and bonding and expanding our families. We never expected to feel like we're drowning. So I tell mamas, if someone gives you the gift of help in whatever way it looks like, take it. For me, it was a psych ward. For me, it was my comedy, to be able to talk about it and laugh and talk about how broken my vagina was, because it was, and to give some levity and some humor to it, because it's necessary. So Dr. Accortt and I, we've been working for years on, both the legislation, but me merging my creativity with my story of overcoming this and really, I'm gonna pat myself on the back, succeeding, both as an individual, thank you ladies, but also as a mom, succeeding with repairing my mental health and really showing up for myself and for my daughter. So I'm working on a long form documentary about my experience. I'm going on what I call a postpartum revolution road trip. I'm traveling to 8 cities this summer, spreading the good word with my comedy and accepting donations for my film. But also, I just want to create communities of moms and birth workers and medical professionals and get us all in the same room so that we can all share information and improve how we all show up for one another. So that's my long spiel. I hope to see you on Instagram, on Twitter, on the TikToks, stories. Hit me up, DM me. I'm always here and always ready to laugh a little bit.
Yes, and I want to thank Angelina, because the reason that I am so open, Angelina calls me or texts me to invite me to do something, and I say yes. I don't even read everything I'm like, yes. Like, she writes and I'm like, yes. When? See you there. And the reason is not because she's a hilarious comic, because she is. The reason is that on her Instagram, on her Twitter, I'm not on TikTok, so I don't know. On her Twitter, she is real. This is what I think we need. We need more people with influence, people who, celebrities, athletes, and everyone who has a following of people who listen to what they have to say. And enough with these ridiculous pictures of pregnant ladies and ladies postpartum in white flowing gowns with the hair and the perfect makeup. Enough already with that. That is baloney. And that just makes all the rest of us who are normal feel like shit.
Yes.
So thank you, Angelina, for showing us the reality and allowing us to laugh about it. Because if we don't laugh, we'll cry. Yes. And it's okay to cry sometimes too. But I think allowing us to laugh about it is what your gift has been.
Thank you. Thank you.
We're happy to answer questions.
Yes, we are. Please. And I see KJ Smith has shared her story. Sam Casper is another woman that I connected with through this work. She is a mom of 2 and a shining success of, really barreling through the first storm with her first child and having a really great experience the second time around. And she makes me want to try again.
You're making me cry.
I'm super excited that Sam is here because she's also going to be in our documentary. She's going to be featured as one of our champions. Sam and I have a very similar story. So I'm just so appreciative of everyone in the chat.
Thanks, Angelina.
If nobody has questions, I'm gonna start calling on folks. That's just like
Actually,
I have one.
Angelina. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, John.
Oh, I got one. Angelina, that was neat. That was fun.
Oh, good. Not for me, but I'm happy you enjoyed it.
Okay, Angelina, as an example, maybe it's an Eynav question.
Okay.
Being as we're into public health and prevention, okay. This may be a simplistic question, but I don't know this area. Is there a way to choose to pick out personalities? That is back when Angelina was not even pregnant. Maybe she was 10 years ago. Could there be a way through psychometric testing, whatever that may be? I'm thinking of excuse the term, like control freaks, like I want control over everything in my life. Would there be a way to pick out women and maybe men, different question, who one day, if you get pregnant, you're assured, you wouldn't say it to the patient, you're a big risk for getting postpartum depression because of the way you are.
Well, it's not personality factors per se, but we absolutely there are absolutely well-known risk factors
Okay.
for postpartum depression, for perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. Let me put it that way.
Okay.
What I'm working on in my research are not even the psychological risk factors, but some biological risk factors. So in one of my recent studies, I'm looking at increase in inflammation in the pregnancy, placing women at higher risk for postpartum mood and anxiety disorders. So the answer to your question is yes, but they are, as you know, John, risk factors. That doesn't mean just because you could have 7 of the 20 risk factors and not end up with a postpartum mood disorder. So that's not as informative as we, would like. But yes, there's been a lot of research on various risk factors, and there are biopsychosocial risk factors, and that's all. I have a whole presentation. I'll have to share it with you.
Oh yeah, that would be great.
Yeah.
Angelina, I'm
Yes.
sure.
Also, Kit, right before we jump into your question, I wanted to add something if possible. Is that okay, Kit?
Sure, go for it.
Great, thank you. John, there's also a study being done at UNC Chapel Hill.
Thank you.
Yes, they reached out to me for their research to be a part of my documentary film that I'm creating right now. And they are doing genetic testing to find out if moms are predisposed to postpartum depression and anxiety. And I did one. I believe Sam Casper, didn't you also participate in Mom Genes?
Yes. So
Yes.
wonderful. Thank you for mentioning that. And that's an ongoing multi-site research study spearheaded by Samantha Meltzer Brody. Meltzer Brody is the hyphenated name. And she's just fabulous and published a lot of great research on this topic. And we hope to be one of the sites moving forward to provide some of the biodata to go into that. It's a huge, they're trying to get thousands and thousands and thousands of women who had postpartum depression to submit their DNA. So I'm so glad you mentioned that. Thank you.
Kit, your question?
Yes, actually, you get probably suggestions for material all the time, but I'm going to throw one at you anyway.
Okay.
One of our mentors back here in Massachusetts, a woman named Jean Watson Driscoll, wrote a book called Women's Moods, well worth reading. Jean said that you would ask a mom, "How are you?" and she would say, "Fine." And what "fine," Jean said, stood for is, jumping on the train here, fucked up, insecure, neurotic, and emotional.
I've seen that.
It's all yours.
I've seen that.
And then the last thing is I would just put in a plug for addressing diaper need as one of the crucial issues for addressing postpartum depression, a great concrete way to deal with it, and an easy in the door kind of thing. Highly recommend that. And that's
Nice.
my 2 cents worth from Massachusetts.
Thank you.
No child wet behind.
Hilarious. Yes.
That's good.
It is really good. I work with with Jamie. What is Jamie's last name? Jamie ran for Congress in one of the districts in Massachusetts, and she also
Jamie Balsito.
Yes.
Valerie Balsito, yes. She'll
yes,
talk to your ear off with a sailor's mouth.
yes, I love Jamie. She's amazing, and she does a lot of the lobby training. Like I lobby on Capitol Hill, and Jamie always does the training. KJ, we've got to get to a woman's question. John and Kit have so ladies, yeah, I gotta do it to you. Okay, KJ, what's your question?
Yeah, I wanted to ask, actually, that's so funny because my husband just walked in when I was about to ask this, but you were talking about how much support your husband had and how you really worked together. And for me, I struggled with a lot of guilt because of how helpful my husband is. And it's supposed to be like, oh, I'm super mom. Oh, I do everything. But he is the best dad in the world. And then to like go to the in-laws and be like, oh, I'm garbage because like he's so great. And how would you struggle with that? And how do you deal with it?
Yes, of course I struggle with it. I'm like, and KJ, you are a postpartum psychosis survivor, right?
Yes. And even with my anxiety now, I'm like, oh, I overshared.
No, you didn't.
Whoa!
I just read what you wrote. So critically important. Everything you said, everyone should read what she wrote in her chat, because I can't support it more. We need more mother baby psychiatric centers. We train our nurses to actually say, please don't worry that if you say yes to these questions that we're going to take your baby away. We are not going to call Child Protective Services. We are not going to, like, that's how we train them, because women like you have shared with us that that's what's going through your mind. So thank you for sharing that. It's so important.
And one thing I feel like it's a little bit different. My experience is, rather than the like lack of attachment, I felt so much attachment that I'm like, I want to open my body up and absorb this baby and like keep him forever and keep him safe.
Keep him safe.
And then being like, oh, but I feel guilty because he's so perfect. And like, no matter what I do, I'm not going to be enough.
Yep.
Yes. Yep. I struggled with the same thing, KJ. You are not alone, lady, especially with my husband. I mean, it's, my daughter's almost 6 and I still have guilt about how effortless he parents.
Yeah.
For me, I'm just like, okay, we need structure. We've got to go here, and I'm not even like, you like by the book or like, whatever. I'm not that organized. Neither is he, but it's just effortless. It flows. It just, he sits there, he plays Barbies for hours. He does bath time for 45 minutes with the LOL dolls. And I'm like, I need a break. Right. It was the same thing when my daughter was an infant, but for me, it was like, he's helping, but it was never in the right way. It was like, why do you need to take a pee while she's screaming? Go get the baby, hold her and pee while you hold her. I do it all the time. TMI, but I'm just saying, but yes, I definitely feel the guilt, whatever it is, like even if they're not helping enough or they're helping too much or helping more than you expected, and you get to rest. You feel guilty about resting. You feel guilty about having a second to your, why, KJ? Why do we feel like, why?
No, my husband's like, please sleep. And I'm like, I can't. I have to take care of the baby. If I sleep, then I'm negligent. If I'm negligent, then someone's going to take the baby away. Like, and then it just spirals.
Right. And that's how you know. Sorry, go ahead, Angelina.
No, I was just wondering, how old is your baby, KJ?
He's 8 months. So that really resonated with me when you said that. And like I said in my comment that, I don't feel like this is a space where this is too much information, but that's when my cycle just came back last month. And I think that was a huge part of it. In a medication I was taking made it all really exacerbated. So, yeah.
Yeah. And that's actually one of the things I've been studying since my dissertation, which was on premenstrual dysphoric disorder at the University of Arizona, because I'm very interested in risk for depression and anxiety. It isn't because of your hormone changes, because if you have a uterus and ovaries, your hormones change. Every month our hormones change. But not every woman has severe anxiety or severe depression or psychosis. But some women happen to be very sensitive to those hormonal changes. It's not, and they've done a lot of studies on, is it so high? Is the estrogen so low? It's not absolute values. It's when there's a change. And there are medical ways to keep your levels. I'm not a medical doctor, so I'm not, making those medical recommendations, but talk to your OB-GYN, talk to your psychiatrist, talk about the fact that these are hormonally driven changes, and they can make recommendations, whether it is taking an SSRI only the week before your period has been shown to be effective. It's not effective in regular depression. You can't do it like that. SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, take 2 to 3 weeks to work for major depressive disorder, but they will work for women who have these sensitivities to hormones. The week before, you only take them for those 5 days and then you stop. Or being on continuous birth control. If you're already on birth control, skip the sugar pills, go right into your next pack. Don't do this because I said so. No. Go talk to your doctor.
I'm trying that next.
But do you do that? So keeping your hormones level and stable is one other way to avoid these shifts in mood that happen because of and who talks about this?
Right.
Yeah. Right. And for me, I had to get off of all of my mood stabilizers and everything when I got pregnant, and also all of my.
Why?
That's just, actually, I went to my psychiatrist. I told him I was pregnant, and he took me off of everything cold turkey.
Oh, oh my gosh. Okay. This is why we need reproductive psychiatrists. I'm so sorry that happened to you, KJ. That's absolutely unacceptable. That you were given the wrong medical advice. And I'm certain that was a well-meaning general psychiatrist. I'm sure that he or she had no intention to harm, but that was absolutely unacceptable. No woman, because of some very minor, and by the way, depending on the mood stabilizer, again, not an MD, because of the mood stabilizer, there are certain risks to the fetus, but there are some that are very, very minimal risk. And the risk to you is death. We're not going to worry about this tiny little risk to your fetus. We're going to worry about you. And a reproductive psychiatrist is going to know all of that. So if you're not back on everything that you need to be back on, I don't remember where you said, are you Homewood? Because I know reproductive psychiatrists near Birmingham.
Well, I'm actually in Clara, but I work in Birmingham. I'm looking for a new psychiatrist because my current one, it's just not going great, especially during this psychosis period, which wasn't a lot of help. And I would love to find someone who specializes in that, especially because I do want to conceive again in the future, and I would love to be.
Exactly. And you want to be on something that you can remain on through your next pregnancy. So I would love to share, and if I haven't told Kimberly and Lauren and Amanda and everyone who put this on, of course, being mindful of the time and thanking you all so much for having us. But what I want everyone to take home from this is that there are very well trained experts in this field near you. And number one, and by the way, what I'm going to do, if it's okay with y'all, I'm going to send you a list from international to national to local where you can share. If you'll share these websites, Kimberly, with everybody who registered, even if they didn't show today, but if they have an interest, they can see where to go to find a vetted maternal mental health provider, and that includes a reproductive psychiatrist. Awesome. Because there aren't enough of us, but there are plenty to go around for now. Amazing things, by the way, happening in Massachusetts, Kit, with MCPAC for moms and everything else that y'all are doing up there, and reproductive psychiatrists, like you call, and you can just have your doctor call them and say, hey, this is what my patient KJ is going through. I don't know what to do for her. Tell me what to do for her. And this reproductive psychiatry is like, boom, do this, 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 this.
Yeah, check out MCPAP.
MCPAP for moms.
More questionable is, you're talking about pharmaceuticals. Sage Therapeutics is doing some research now with a woman named Jennifer Barkin, who's also an interesting person, around antidepressants that work in just a very short couple of days. Unfortunately, they also cost a whole bunch of money.
But your insurance will pay for it.
But they're working on it.
Their insurance will pay for it. This is brexanolone. Thank you for bringing it up. It is the first FDA-approved medication for postpartum depression. This is severe postpartum depression. This is not moderate. You do need to be an inpatient for 72 hours. It's an infusion, and you have to be monitored. The biggest risk factors are somnambulance. So they're worried about women being kind of like shaky or sleepy or falling. That's the reason you have to be an inpatient. It's not because it's an unsafe medication. And that's Sage Pharmaceuticals, brexanolone. I can send the information to Kimberly Kirkland as well to share with you all, because that's another great option. If your option is like Angelina, going to the inpatient psychiatric ward, then you may want to go ahead and spend the 3 days in the inpatient unit of your medical center and get this infusion, because it's incredible the results I've seen, the research that's come out about the effectiveness, safety. It's a fabulous drug, and it works in a different way. It's not an SSRI, it's GABA. It's through a different mechanism, but it's really very interesting. So I'll send all that information for y'all to share. Any other final questions?
Well, John does have a last question, so this
Okay.
will be our last one. And thank you both so much for being here. Clearly, we need to do this like every month. Every month should probably be Maternal Mental Health Month. I even had more questions, but I'll table those for the next time you both
We'll do
will
it.
hopefully join us. I do have one question for Angelina, though, after John's question, but he asks, are PPD and anxiety more common in first pregnancies than in later? And if you have PPD or anxiety in the first pregnancy, are you likely to have it in subsequent pregnancies?
It's another one of those risk factors. So it doesn't seem more common in first. I mean, there's some research to suggest parity plays a role, but then when we look at other variables in those, like we're doing statistical analyses and we'll see, does parity, like having just your first baby, does that put you at higher risk? And then we put in the other variables, things like high BMI, things like race, so being non-white, as I mentioned before, things like having a medical complication or having a baby in the NICU. All these other things tend to kick out the parity variable in those analyses.
Substance use disorder.
Question. Sorry, Kit?
Substance use disorder.
Absolutely. Oh gosh, yes. No, there's a long list of biopsychosocial risk factors. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and then my question for Angelina. Are you coming anywhere near Birmingham on your tour?
Up to the comedy club.
I would love
Alice
to.
Stevenson.
I would love to. Kit reached out about the senator in Massachusetts, but I would love to come to anywhere near Beeham. I'm currently going on tour now. I'm going to be on the Ellen DeGeneres show on June 26th.
Amazing.
That is awesome.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
2 weeks after that. And so when Ellen airs, tickets for my tour are going to go on sale. And I'm headed out. I'm going to Atlanta first.
Oh,
There you go.
And I'll be in Florida. I'll be in Pittsburgh. I'll be in Philly. See Sam Pastor. I would love to add Beeham to the list. I just need a movie theater to show my my film, and I need some butts in the seats.
Okay, well we'll talk about that. We'll
I
talk
love it.
about that.
Yes. So
We're gonna have to get the censors involved in this presentation.
They're going to bleep us out, both of us.
yeah,
But can Angelina share the link to her, the documentary for funding? Because that's the other piece. And I think it's really important that people understand that she is not doing this backed by big production companies or anything. This has been a labor of love. She has worked so hard, ups, downs, people finagling, some shady shit. And she won't talk bad, but I can. So I think, it would be great if everybody supported her, and she wants to get this documentary finished and out there so that more moms and dads and family members can see it. And I want to just make sure that's made very clear that we need to support her.
And that's at angelinaspicer.com. That's where we can go. So we'll make sure to send that out to everybody along with the resources.
Yes.
But you both are amazing. This was the fastest hour ever. I'm like, no, there's so much more to talk about. But I hope you both will come back again soon, and we can talk about even more important parts of this topic. So,
More to
but
share.
thank you, everyone. Thank you, Angelina and Dr. Accortt, so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone, for joining us. And we'll be back in June. Stay tuned for that topic.
Thank you all so much. Have a good evening.
Well.
Hi, everybody.